This is San Francisco.
Welcome back to San Francisco. Show is now 1 year old, and I'm gonna run down the 5 most downloaded episodes of the past year of putting out the show. Before I do that, I just want to say thank you to the people listening to this and expressing that the podcast has been helpful to you in some way. People reaching out and saying things like, I forgot about the mayor's all expenses paid trip to Israel this year. Or now I have a better idea of how to spot a yimby out in the wild. Oh shit, I didn't know about that before. I heard it on the podcast. All of that has made my life a little better. So thank you so much. If you want to help in this direction, the best way is to post up online any episodes that were useful in some way to you on social media with a link. And in addition, of course, you can always go to patreon.com/sadfrancisco, help out monetarily to help pay for the podcast, the hosting of it online, the editing, and the transcriptions. I'm working on improving your audio experience for year 2 because despite my past experience DJing mostly weddings and places in town that have since closed down, I know that especially early on, the audio was a bit underwhelming. And one more thing, if you have some obligatory gifts to buy this year, consider subscribing someone to the podcast, or you could pick up the book I co-authored with the activist Miss Major, which came out earlier this year from Verso. Miss Major Speaks: Conversations with a Black Trans Revolutionary. With that, here are the most downloaded episodes of the past year, all of which you can find linked in the show notes.
Bringing the hits. 5.
Kate Raphael co-founded Queers Undermining Israeli Terrorism, or QUIT, back in the Bay in 2001, and later got arrested in Israel for taping IDF harassment of Palestinians. In this episode, we talked about why Palestinian liberation is a queer issue and how Israel hired an SF-based PR firm called Blue Star to pinkwash Israel's genocide. This is the part where I asked Kate what it meant to have her people back in the Bay protesting for both Palestine and also for her freedom while she spent 5 weeks locked up in an Israeli jail.
This was the very first demonstration that internationals were called to in Belen. I was arrested with, I think, 5 other internationals. And so that's how I ended up in jail. When I got out and I heard that people had these protests, demanding my freedom, it was a mixed thing. I felt embarrassed on one hand that, so many Palestinians are arrested all the time. There are so many Palestinian political prisoners and no one knows their name. And here people are like protesting, about me, who's the Jewish American, who's like not facing any torture or anything, and, was going to get sent home eventually. But it also was like, that's what solidarity is, right? That's what being in a movement is supposed to do for you. And it's a model for everybody about how you do solidarity and you have your people's back. And, so it made me feel great that my people were so together and that they did an amazing job of organizing and, using it to bring in new people.
4.
Getting to host the APEC conference of dictators from Asia and the world's largest corporations, plus Joe Biden, was a pet project of our mayor, London Breed, who said that APEC would be a huge event for San Francisco and spent the city's own money on overtime for cops and Department of Public Works sweeps and making downtown feel emptier somehow than it has already felt for a long time, creating a walled city with 8-foot walls that probably looked a lot like something out of Mayor Breed's trip to Israel in April. This was just our current mayor's way of bending over for her tech overlords like angel investor Ron Conway and Y Combinator's Gary Tan, Salesforce's Mark Benioff. In the same way that her predecessors Gavin Newsom and Ed Lee did 10 years ago for the sailing competition America's Cup, which sucked millions from San Francisco, all to make a billionaire from Oracle, Larry Ellison, happy so he could see his yacht win in a competition between rich people who own yachts. Of course, Ellison soon sailed that yacht out of San Francisco and now claims 98% of the Hawaiian island of Lanai. Malaya from City College's Anak Bayan chapter talks about how San Francisco's mayor rolled out the red carpet for President Biden and the Philippines' authoritarian ruler Bongbong Marcos to have a meet and greet about freer trade and increasing the exploitation of workers in Asia.
And we see that especially Marcos Jr. is really increasing a lot of foreign investments into the Philippines. And that's why, Marcos Jr. really loves APEC. That's why he's coming here in November for APEC to sell out the Filipino people and the Filipino land to these big corporations and to the U.S. He wants to really solidify the Philippines as the U.S.'s puppet. I mean, it's been solidified for decades now, but really just want to push it more. And that's someone we really want to highlight coming in to the city.
It is so intense that we are rolling out the red carpet basically for someone like Marcos.
Yeah. Like I said, Marcos is really coming here to really give the Philippines to the US, and the person who is signing off on this is Biden.
3.
Next episode asks how we, as queer and trans people, how are we supposed to live on a light pole with a trans flag painted on it? Because the Transgender Cultural District was created in 2017 supposedly as a safe haven for trans people in the Tenderloin, and the city put $90,000 into painting 12 light poles pink, blue, and white, colors of the trans flag. And the city continues to keep funding superficial things like these cultural districts, like the Transgender Cultural District, but refuses to do the one thing that represents the biggest cost of living in all of our lives, regardless of what culture we come from, which is to give us low income or free housing. So that's what this episode with fan favorite Gemma DeCristo is about.
People are kind of starting to wake up to what cultural districts are, and specifically the trans district, which I think is maybe the most brutal version of this, because as you've alluded to and discussed both in this show and previous ones, Toshio, the Tenderloin is kind of one of the last bastions of lesser gentrified parts of San Francisco.
Yeah.
So rather than, when it didn't work to, meet the Tenderloin with abject force, like send in more and more and more and more police, what we're seeing with the trans district is that it is kind of a euphemism for punishment, as so many other forms of punishment. Just as we could criticize how carceral a lot of services have become in the last 40 or 50 years in the U.S., things like welfare, medical care, and of course nonprofit services, we see a similar kind of euphemism of policing and punishment in the trans district and what it embodies. And that it's basically trying to rebrand policing, as we've, of course, seen in the last, 50 years or less, really, since the civil rights movement, as safety or culture, or a term they like to use for cultural districts, and especially the trans district, placemaking.
2.
People are asking, who is Urban Alchemy? What is this nonprofit that is dressing up security guards in matching camouflage uniforms in a very cult-like manner and selling them as another layer of police, not just here in the Bay, though it started in San Francisco, but has since been exported to Portland, Oregon, Austin, Texas, and LA. Harm reductionists Brooke Lober and Norma Asucar offer some answers, and we'll continue following Urban Alchemy as they continue to get millions of dollars in contracts from the city, joining the SFPD, the sheriffs, the National Guard, California Highway Patrol, the University of California Police, BART and Muni Police, and Neighborhood Association, condo, and office security guards in doing jack shit in the Tenderloin except to collect checks to make their rich overlords feel better about their life choices.
I've seen money exchange, from Urban Alchemy to clients, selling shit. So,
that's the other thing, is that people are going to use their position and do whatever they're going to do.
Right.
Cops do it, right?
Exactly.
So they're part of the street life here. They are part of it.
Not
And
to help. Not to help.
I had a conversation with a woman who was like, my son went to the Tenderloin Center to get help. And he talked to somebody at the front door and they didn't know where he could get help. And I'm thinking, well, was the person at the front door Urban Alchemy? Because they're not going to be able to help you like a harm reductionist can. They're not actually doing harm
They're
reduction
not
work.
trained to do anything.
Right, which is exactly what the company alleges that they're doing is training people who are inside of jails in most cases, or halfway houses, and this is an opportunity for them to get like some work time. They're also supposed to be like, this sort of help, or sort of like the in-between for unhoused people and cops, like this barrier.
It's another layer of harassment for poor people. That's all that is.
Who is ready? 1.
In 2004, an Insight Women of Color Against Violence conference at UC Santa Barbara led to the instant classic, the anthology titled The Revolution Will Not Be Funded, which starts with a piece by Dylan Rodriguez, who I talked to in the recent episode about the gaslighting at colleges that's happening around Palestine right now. In the book, Dylan and others break down why the nonprofit industrial complex is toxic to movements. And in this interview with Dean Spade, which we re-released for Giving Tuesday in November, a day when charities send out billions of messages to us begging for our money, Dean lays out how the nonprofit industrial complex has morphed since the 2020 uprisings.
I just think that like the fantasy that we will all get paid. I mean, when I did that talk recently, and I posted on social media like announcements about the talk, and the talk was titled "Should Social Movement Work Be Paid?" The number of people who responded to those posts being like, "Absolutely, can't wait to hear what Dean Spade has to say about this." And I'm like, the answer is whether we want it to or not, it's not going to be. Like, why would our opponents pay for us to destroy their piles of wealth and their jails and prisons and their systems of extraction? If we are getting paid for it, there might be something circumscribed about the work, or it might be like a temporary fluke. I mean, I think what's frustrating about it too, part of the lie of the nonprofit is that a few special people, do-gooders, will go work on nonprofits and they'll solve our societal problems like poverty and racism or whatever. And the rest of us, our job is just to donate and maybe to go to the Women's March once a year or something like that, and to just kind of be demobilized. And most people have never heard of or can't think about grassroots work that's not nonprofity now. Even though if they thought about it, they're like, oh, I've heard of the Montgomery bus boycott and like tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of working class Black women somehow making transportation happen for an entire city of Black people. Like, actually, you do know stories about huge amounts of unpaid work, the farm workers movement, whatever. But most of us think at this point that social justice is either a career or like a spectator sport. And that is so successful, that story. All the media coverage of social movement stuff is so skewed and supports all the myths that are demobilizing, like someone else will do it, or those people are too dangerous and wild and you don't want to be part of that. And so I feel like there's just this like thing of like, what we really need is to help each other see and imagine what autonomous organizing looks like.
You can get all of these episodes in the archives. Again, they're linked in the show notes for this episode. Much, much love to everyone who was on the show over this past year. Also to Caitlin for the edits, Kristen for the opener, and thank you again for listening to Sad Francisco. wishing all of us a happy 2024 with time tearing shit down with other people who also are not so jaded that they don't believe that another world is possible. Land back, free Palestine. Never forget there are at least 10 empty homes for every person who is unhoused in the city. Sad Francisco is produced by Toshio Moronic, edited by Caitlin Wood. And if you like the show, again, you can go to patreon.com/sadfrancisco to check out all of our past episodes. See you next time in Sad Francisco.